Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin on Wednesday, August 10th, 2022. And here I am on virtual screen 4 of about 7 different virtual screens or virtual desktops if you prefer. And as opposed to the last video where I showed you this and then told you there's actually something running here and we're going to show it, I'm going to assure you now that there is nothing running because we're going to be using this video to install a different Linux system under the Windows Subsystem for Linux. One where LXD is a lot harder to get running for Linux containers, but I show you this because I make a point of being on Ubuntu 18.04 for quite a lot of my videos up to this point. It's very time sensitive. By the time you're seeing this video, it might not be true anymore. But in the spirit of showing you why I don't advocate the default version that gets installed with WSL, I am going to give you that demo right now. So I bring up Powershell. Now I have a special way of bringing up Powershell. You might know that if you bring up Powershell the normal way, you get this blue screen. It's awful to use. Copy paste works differently. You can't go to true full screen with function F11. Yeah, there's no tabs. You can't change the font size with Control plus or Control minus. It's coming up in much the same user interface as the old command prompt, right? DOS, right? DOS and PowerShell are not that different along these lines. And it's one of those things that really made Windows look ancient compared to other systems, no matter how much they want to color code and make fancy PowerShell. So their solution to that was the Unified Windows Terminal program, which I use to bring up Linux all the time, but I made a special icon to allow me to bring up the PowerShell. So as opposed to the blue background, it's the black background. It's coming up full screen without tabs. This should be the subject for a video. But I just point that out as a bonus here. Now the WSL program is accessible under PowerShell and under command prompt, DOS, and we use it to issue all kinds of commands as if it were the true host under hypervisor for Windows subsystems. Now it's not, it's just a program that lets you kind of say, oh, that thing over there that's running side by side with me under the hypervisor, here's a bunch of control commands because you need to run them from somewhere, so might as well be Windows. If you're Microsoft, there's really no other choice. So if I just type WSL enter, it would load my default version in and it would run Linux right here. I can probably just do that, right? For the sake of letting you see. Now this is booting up for the first time, I will tell you. This slow process there, that was a Linux boot, right? Now, how do I know that? Because I can type things like WSL list. Well, I can type list to show. Oh yeah, because I'm under Linux. WSL command is not there anymore. We need to exit. Now I can type WSL list. And you can see I've got Ubuntu 18.04 and it is my default. That's why it runs when I just type WSL on its own here. Now I can also type WSL list -- running and it will tell me that this is the one that's running. There's also WSL shutdown, which will shut down all running instances so that when I do WSL running again, there are no running distributions. So I've essentially just killed my Ubuntu 18.04 that was running and anything else that was running, because you can run multiple Linuxes at the same time under Windows Subsystem for Linux. So why use containers? Why use LXD? Well, because it's a unified API and you're not closing yourself into this Microsoft-centric odd API world. You're closing yourself into the Linux-centric odd API world. Okay, anyway. We can still use WSL -- list. Just because it's not running doesn't mean we can't list it. But we have a number of other Linuxes available to us online. So how do you get that list of things that are available online? WSL -- list -- online. Here are the other versions of Ubuntu that you can get, right? So there's an unnamed version, which is always the default, which will be the latest, which is what gets which is what gets installed when you don't specify anything. So when you're brand new to all this, let me clear that screen and do a WSL list online again. When you're new to all this and you do your original WSL space -- install, like I've always advocated, you will get Ubuntu 20.04. You get the latest. Unless you do space -- distribution, and then you can name a particular distribution the way it occurs under the name here. And so we'll be doing this one here, right? And that will put the 20.04 installation on my machine. Let's go ahead and do that, right? So as you can see, it's pretty awesome. It's just as fast as using LXD containers. It's a great way to get a local Linux running without the overhead of containers, because even with containers, there's a little overhead. Even with WSL, there's a little overhead. You could be running it on the bare metal. But we're going to watch Ubuntu 20.04 install. Right, so it pulled down the image. Now it's going through the install process. It's asking for a username. We'll just give it, well, when I do these usernames, I try and make them a little bit different than the ones that are used in my containers, because containers always get the default Ubuntu. So this is an opportunity to remind yourself you're not really in one of those LXD created containers. And I use things like Alice and Dorothy, Nell, Princess Nell. Got to give it a password. And there we go. We're now at Nell at Lundervond. Nell is usually in Diamond Age, but Nell will be in Lundervond at this time. And one of the things you do typically right after a fresh install of Ubuntu or any Debian-based repo is a sudo apt update, which requires your password. And as you can see, as opposed to getting an image through the LXD system where everything is really up to date, when you get a new image through the Microsoft Windows Subsystem for Linux, there's 277 packages that can be upgraded. So we'll just go ahead and do that. Sudo apt upgrade. Don't tell me my videos aren't complete and honest. I can't even control minus to make that font smaller. So you'll see we're actually in one of those old-fashioned COM Windows, whatever you want to call them. But it's before the unified Windows terminal existed. So this is full screen, and I can't really make it full screen and get rid of gadgetry or the taskbar, right? So hitting function F11, no love. Hitting Control plus and Control minus will not change the font size. I couldn't get more tabs up here if I wanted to. So one of the things we want to do is leave this old interface behind as quickly as possible. But the good news is after this is installed, which it really is, it should be registered here. And because this is the unified terminal of function F11 here, we'll toggle it back and forth between full screen and not full screen mode. Control plus and minus will increase and decrease the font size. You can get new tabs when you want them. And one of the new tabs that should be registered here, but I don't see it yet, it probably will appear. Probably if I exit out and re-enter a PowerShell here, it will. But that's not what we need right now. What we need right now is just getting it up to date enough so that when I do an LXD thing, you'll see what the heck I'm talking about. Okay, so LXD is a container system, which is an alternative way of having little Linux playgrounds. An alternative way to this, what I'm showing you right now. This is having a little Linux playground directly under Windows Subsystem for Linux. You can have multiples running. You can switch between them. It's directly supported by Windows with all kinds of integrations. So why wouldn't you just let the story stop there? Why use LXD or even Docker or anything like it if you can have these? Well, the answer is because you just want to learn how to do it in a way that doesn't create Windows operating system dependencies. You don't want to be dependent on the Windows subsystem for Linux. If you want different Linux playgrounds on your Windows system so you can kick the tires of Linux, have a little test development environment, you shouldn't have to do it directly under Windows Subsystem for Linux using its custom API stuff. You should be able to do it under a Linux-based container management system, Docker or LXD. I choose LXD because it gives you more system control. Docker is mostly for containerizing apps. The whole discussion gets complicated, but LXD is for containerizing a whole system so you can't even tell you're in a container. So the apt update is just about done, which means we can try and get an LXD container running here under Windows, under Linux 20.04. Okay, so clear LXD, no, not LXD, LSB underscore release -- all tells us what we're on. So we are in fact on Ubuntu 20.04. You see that? That's our, verification. That's our our verification that we're actually on the Linux that I showed you we installed, and it's now up to date with that apt get update and the apt get upgrade, right? Those two things that are here in my command line recall are the two things that get it up to date. It's like running a system update. Now LXD is installed by default because Canonical, the company that makes Ubuntu, is trying to set expectations. So LXD is there. Oh, look at that command. Okay, so they're telling you how to install it. I was incorrect about it being pre-installed. It can be installed with LXD installer for version 1 or sudo apt install LXD for version 1:0.1. Now, there's also generally snap store instructions on installing it, right? So you can install it through the snap store, or you can install it through sudo apt install. So let's try sudo apt install LXD. We're going to take their advice and do this. That seems to be the newer one, right? 0. See, I don't even know what that's saying. Is that the newer one? They're giving this one first. Let's try this one first. Oh, see that? I can do it. Copy and paste works the right way. Okay, now LXD. Yeah. Something not found. All right, first thing wrong. Let's try sudo apt install LXD without the installer. We answer yes. Now we type LXD. See? Still not there. We'll see if it's path issues, right? So if it's path issues, we can exit, and then we can run that distro version again. Now you have to be careful, because now if you do WSL, and you'll see I'm in the PowerShell host now, PowerShell. I'm in PowerShell now, and I can list my distros. So I have 18.04 as the default. So if I just type WSL here, I would get the default. So I have to, type the distribution. You can do -d, command line completion. No, that doesn't work. Ubuntu -20.04. And now if there's any issues having to do with path that needed to be created on login, it's there. So we can try LXD. Okay, well, at least now it's telling us the snap thing, right? So these are issues that I'm encountering on 20.04 that just don't exist when you're on 18.04. So we'll try this. Snap install. Error, cannot communicate with server. All right. All right. Do I have snap? I do have snap. Is there an update for snap? Basics, find, info, install, remove, list. Snap, find, LXD. Not very hopeful, right? Control C out of that. What the heck? What the heck? I've had more success than this in the past. But this just gets the point across, right? Snap, install LXD. Dial, Unix, run, snap socket. Okay, so right off the bat, you can see there's not really a lot of hope here with installing it. But I do happen to know that LXD is kind of incompatible with systems that don't have distrod on them. So this is a little digression, but to show you about the kind of steps we need to do. And honestly, this step has to be done with 18.04 as well. But there's something called distrod. Distrod. And there's the GitHub one. Is always GitHub, right? And you can scroll down and you can see what it's for. This allows you to get systemd running on things that don't have systemd. It's specifically for WSL2. And there's two ways to run it. You can either install a new distro with systemd running, or you can install it on a existing WSL2 instance, right? So they tell you how to set the default to version 2 to make sure that your installed version is 2. They tell you what to download, and then they tell you how to enable it, right? Oh, this is option 2 here. Did I just ruin the video? No. Okay, I was showing you option 2 before I really scrolled down to option 2. So I don't like doing this kind of downloading and installing. Look at that, installing something on the Windows side. It just doesn't sit right for me. So we go to option 2 and we download a file from somewhere, you know, Linux side, Ubuntu side, right? So I download this file, and before I do that, I'm going to cd to home. It cd'd me to my home directory in Windows, right? Not a terribly bad thing to do because they want you to know that that's there. It's such a useful spot for integration with the Windows side. But I'm going to cd to my home on the Linux side. And I'm going to type that curl command, which will put that file there, ls, you can see the install file. And then you just run that file and you'll have systemd on your system. You still need to activate it. Oh, we have to chmod make it executable. So now that file is executable. And now we run it with admin level privileges, right? So now we have systemd running on this system. I'll give you a little before and after to prove it to you. So there's a program called PS that shows what's running. It's your program IDs, and it's your abbreviated name for the command. Now it just so happens that you can PS with a particular program ID, and the one we're interested in always has program ID 1. It never doesn't. Okay, and you can see that its default columns is showing you that it's /init, but we don't really know whether that is the old init system, sysv, or whether it's the new init system, systemd. So we can give it a couple extra parameters here. So we can format the output and specifically show a very user-friendly column called com that I happen to know about against port 1. And you can see it's called init. That happens to be the old system. We can suppress the showing of the header so that it's no headers. And so now you can just see the single word init. But we want to enable systemd. So we go back to our documentation here after you've run that script. You have two options to enable it. You can try and do it whenever Windows starts. I haven't had luck with that, but the more reliable one is just enabling it in a way that starts every time Windows, that instance of WSL starts. So I like that. So we'll enable, oh, it's got to be sudo. This is something that needs to be done with system privileges. All right. So distrod has been enabled. Now your shell will start under systemd. So we can do this command again, and we haven't restarted, right? So it's still init. In fact, I'll get the better command that suppresses the column headers. And then I'll copy that into my operating system copy buffer, right? And then we will exit and then do the command to run that again. And now we can put that command in systemd, right? We were previously under init, which is sysv or sys5, and now we're under systemd. And now some of the things that we try and do with the snap store might actually work. Snap install LXD. Oh, sudo snap install LXD. Is already installed. Look at that. So it might be that once we activate systemd, once we activate systemd, it may actually recognize that LXD is already installed. So all that install stuff that we tried to do before might not actually have been necessary. So that's the first hurdle you need to get over. Now, if I were to try and do this in a fresh and pure way, I would install 20.04, immediately run distrod without those attempts at the snap store and apt install. But nonetheless, LXD is actually here, and I can probably just type LXD. Failed to load. You must run it as root. Okay, sudo LXD. Let's see what happens. Again, failed to load, no such file or directory. LXD is already running. All right. So what you do at this point is sudo LXD init. You have to initialize the system. You have to initialize LXD so that it's set up properly on your system, even though it's already installed. So we enter that, and it brings you into a wizard. All right. So what I do with a wizard under 18.04, Ubuntu 18.04 Bionic Beaver, is I hit enter, 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 enter through the wizard. And there you have it. This is the problem. You can't just enter, 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 enter through the wizard. Look at all those problems and all those issues coming up there. That is not right. That is quite wrong, in fact, and is a showstopper. How many people out there are running LXD under 20.04 on under Windows Subsystem for Linux? I'm going to guess not a lot. Now, there's other paths to this. When you look at the distrod site, there's this option 1, and it could be that when you pull down a new distro, that having distrod running already using a Windows installer, a Windows side installer, oh my God, I'm not going to do that. What is it doing to my Windows system? You want me to run a zip there? And there's kind of a benefit, right? So you can get, LXD under 20.04, maybe, but it requires you doing the type of thing that I just am very, very remiss to do. So what I actually end up doing is I install a different WSL. I do go through this very similar process. Now watch. Exit. So we've exited out. Clear. WSL list. So I now have 18.04 as my default. I have 20.04 to kick the tires with. And let's WSL -- list the ones that are available online. Now there aren't multiple 18.04s, and that is unfortunate because I wanted to be able to run 2 instances of 18.04 side by side and show you how you can get through this wizard nice and smooth, right? So that's what I've actually done on my already installed one here. And I guess I'll stop the video there because you don't need to see it work right. You just need to know that if you do the process I just did, installing distrod immediately after getting 18.04, that sudo apt install LXD works, and then sudo LXD init also works. They work. You can get through it. And what I just showed you here was the showstopper, why I don't use 20.04 under Windows Subsystem for Linux to host my containers. The defaults for the wizard don't work. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you soon, and don't forget to install Ubuntu 18.04 by doing this. -- distribution. And that will install a nice 18.04. And that will let you go through a process much like I showed you. Get distrod on it using option number 2. Sudo apt install LXD. Sudo apt init. Enter, 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 enter. You'll have LXD running under the Windows Subsystem for Linux and have yourself some yummy, yummy Linux containers.